This is an Apple PowerMac G5. That's right, I have one. I've yet to cover much of anything Apple related on this channel. After all, my entire collection is traditional PCs. Though I've been mildly interested in Macs in the past, since, something a little different, they're usually too expensive for me to really care that much. But every once in a blue moon, there are exceptions. The PowerMac G5 has always been a machine I've been interested in, and when I had the chance to buy one off of a friend of mine, I knew I had to take the offer. Ever since I've gotten this machine, I've wanted to do something with it for a video. After all, I spent over $100 on this stupid thing, and I wanted to recoup at least some of that. Though, the question remained, what? Well, I've done plenty of stupid things with Windows Longhorn over the years, so fuck it, why not? But wait, how on earth am I going to install Windows Longhorn on a PowerPC processor? After all, no PowerPC version of Windows Longhorn exists. Yet. The G5 was pretty powerful back in its day, so instead, why don't we try virtualizing it? Yeah, Windows Longhorn in a virtual machine on a PowerMac G5. Stupid? Yeah. I already have an idea of how it will go, which is badly. I mean, think of all the things I could cover instead related to the G5. I could cover Linux on the G5, or some of the many ways enthusiasts are trying to keep these old PowerPC Macs usable. Instead, here we are doing something that nobody asked for and probably nobody cares about. I suppose that is every video I've uploaded on this channel, so alright, let's go. My G5 is a bit of a later one, the A1047 model from early 2005, which is also a dual processor model. Specifically, this one has dual 2GHz PowerPC 970FX processors. This model also has an ATI Radeon 9600 GPU, 512MB of RAM, although this one's actually been upgraded to 4 gigs, and it also has a 160GB hard drive. This machine is also running macOS 10 Leopard, if you were curious, although it probably would have shipped with Tiger. I've picked out a selection of builds we'll try today and just see what happens, I suppose. We'll be doing one build from every milestone phase. Milestone 3 build 3683 from September 2002, Milestone 4 build 4008 from February 2003, Milestone 5 build 4029 from June 2003, Milestone 6 build 4039 from August 2003, Milestone 7 build 4074 from April 2004, and Milestone 8 build 4093 from August 2004. My god, that was a mouthful. The program we'll be using today is Microsoft Virtual PC 7, which is a pretty garbage program to be honest, but it's the only one I've actually gotten to consistently work. At least somewhat. Since I have plenty of RAM in this computer, we'll give these VMs their max amount of RAM that I can allocate, which is 512MB of system RAM and 16MB of VRAM. A fun quirk of this software is that it isn't possible to independently set the date and time inside the virtual machine. It always mirrors the date and time from the host system, so I had to remember to set the entire system date back to the right one, or else it wouldn't work at all. With all that, it was time to get started. I had Activity Monitor open so we could see the CPU usage during this. I'm sure it'll come in handy when I have to figure out whether the OS has crashed or not. Interestingly, you can see what CPU it appears to be using at a given time, since there's these large swings in the CPU usage. Regarding this first build, 3683, I let it sit here doing its thing for a while. It certainly took its time. It sat on the completing installation phase of setup for a while, and in the end, it took about 45 minutes for the entire setup to complete. Not crazy, but this thing definitely wasn't super quick, at least on the surface. Nothing made that more apparent than watching it try to play the Windows XP out-of-box experience intro video. Fortunately, after the out-of-box experience, it seemed to clear up a little bit, and while it was still noticeably slow, it seemed manageable. If it wasn't already clear, I've actually never tried Longhorn in this software before, and something I was curious about was how it would react to VM additions being installed. So that's what I tried, and all seemed well at first, but then it kind of just hung after a while. As it turns out, Windows didn't like some of the drivers that were being installed, and it threw a hardware compatibility error. behind the installation window. So I had no idea it was sitting there waiting. So because of that, it took a lot of extra time to get everything installed, but it wasn't too bad yet. So how's the performance? Well, unsurprisingly, any animations or anything video related are incredibly slow. But outside of the audio drivers, everything seemed to be supported on this build, and while it definitely had its moments where it was super slow, I think it's honestly kind of workable. About as workable as Longhorn 3683 can be. We'll come back to that a little later. For now, I just want to get all these installed since that's probably what's going to take the longest amount of time. So let's move on to the next build, 4008. This is going to be a quick one. Assuming you saw my massive Longhorn video, you would know that build 4008 is one of the very first Windows builds to use the Windows Image install system, which had the benefit, initially, of cutting down on the amount of time it took for an install to complete. I was hoping that would apply here. It certainly didn't take very long to load the installer, and sure enough, the first phase of setup took just under 15 minutes, while the second phase took just a few minutes. Within 20 minutes, the entire setup was finished and we were at the out-of-box experience. Though for some reason, the background decided it didn't want to show up for work today, which was interesting. And this time, when it made it to the desktop, there was a hardware pop-up for the audio card. Installing VM Editions didn't fix this either, but I suppose this isn't surprising since the audio didn't work in the last build either. VM Editions also couldn't fix the photo tile, which was absolutely screwed up. I'm not really sure how that happened. But outside of some minor hardware support issues, just like with 3683, everything seemed to be working here. It still felt kind of manageable to me, though it definitely seemed a little bit slower than the last build. They were so similar, there's just not really much else to say. So let's move on to build 4029, the Milestone 5 compile to be specific, which initially was pretty similar to build 4008 in how fast the install was going, though the second phase of setup took much longer this time, long enough that the computer's screensaver kicked in, and hey, wait a minute. This one took about 40 minutes in total to complete. Everything may have been going smoothly, but nothing could prepare me for what happened next. That's right, the colors were absolutely fucking awful. In all my years of tinkering, I've actually never seen Windows Longhorn in 4-bit color, but I gotta say, it looks about as bad as I could have expected. Something that was also immediately noticeable was that it was a lot slower than the last two builds. It took more than 5 minutes for the desktop to fully load, and for the machine to actually be usable. The best metric for speed here turned out to be the VM Editions installer, as this time it took more than 20 minutes for VM Editions to install, compared to just 5 before. Considering the colors were also messed up out of the box, I was skeptical that drivers would fix anything, but to my surprise, it actually did fix the colors. So at least the time spent on installing the additions was worth it. What additions couldn't fix was the performance, which even after a reboot was still just horrendous. That wasn't surprising, I knew it would be bad at some point. Anything with Windows Explorer specifically, which was known to have memory leaking issues, was just painfully slow. This is the first one where it just felt too slow to be super manageable beyond the desktop, which wasn't a good sign for the next build, 4039, which is notoriously slow and unstable. This is the later compile of 4039, the one without all the extra programs and stuff attached to it, because I figured the regular compile would be enough of a mess on its own. Surprisingly though, this one didn't take very long to install, just 25 minutes compared to the previous build taking 40. The colors were still absolutely awful. This likely wouldn't be something that would change, at least out of the box, and afterwards reality kicked in and it was back to being super slow. VM Editions took about 25 minutes to install this time around. And while this one did fix the colors, the animations on the logon screen were now pretty much entirely absent, which is something I don't see very often. At this point, unsurprisingly, it was getting less and less usable. I started having to cut out the loading times because some things were just taking so long to load. We'll come back to performance later, but at this point, it's just unusable enough that any future build probably won't be any better. So I just want to get the last two installed and we'll loop back around to do some comparisons. I knew the last two builds would be tough, but what I did not expect was for build 4074 to not even work at all. This build's pre-installation environment refused to take any keyboard or mouse input, so while it booted perfectly fine, all we could look at was the welcome page. I tried a couple of things, but it just wasn't working. I later remembered this build has an issue with its PS2 driver, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's what's going on here. So instead, I decided to clone one of the other VMs and install it over top an existing install. This is something I've done before on my modern PC enough that I don't really think about it usually. I wish I was thinking though, because I cloned one of the slowest builds, which added to the amount of time this took. But it did the trick. Setup loaded fine, I was able to install everything with no issue at all. Because of that initial detour, this process took more than an hour this time. Once again, most of that time was spent in the hardware detection phase. This build changed quite a bit from its predecessors, so it's not surprising that things really were falling apart here. It took a very long time to load the desktop, VM additions took absolutely forever to install, and the inevitable finally happened as the computer was permanently stuck in 640 by 480 at 4-bit color. Additions didn't save it this time. This of course made it just that much more unpleasant to use. So seeing how the last few builds had performed, I didn't even think build 4093 was going to work at all. What I did try this time was booting it off of a DVD I made for one of the old Longhorn videos. The reason is that this DVD has a weird copy of 4093 burned to it that used the pre-installation environment from a much older build. This build normally has the same PS2 issue that 4074 has, so I thought using an older pre-installation environment would make it work better. And as it turns out, I was exactly right. It was able to load the PS2 driver without any issue. So with that out of the way, I might as well copy and paste exactly what I said about the installation experience for every other build. The first part, the initial copying part, that wasn't too bad. It was maybe 20 minutes or so. The hardware detection part, oh man, it was entirely predictably one of the worst I think I've ever seen. This took so long. I had to leave and go do other stuff, and even though I got sidetracked, I came back to the computer more than 2 hours later to find it was still not done. Activity Monitor was really pulling its weight here since I truly had no idea if it had crashed or not. It finally finished the entire thing almost 2 hours afterwards, putting this entire thing in total at well over 4 hours to install. It took probably about another 10 minutes just to load the desktop, where once again everything was looking like Windows 95. This build was so far gone that it actually never even loaded the desktop on the first attempt and required a few reboots to get it to eventually load everything, which wasn't surprising. 4093 is one of the most difficult builds to deal with after all. So now that they're all installed, I thought I would go back and do some comparisons just to see how each build performed against each other. There really isn't a whole lot else to do in these. Most of the time spent is just waiting for the operating system to catch up. This could be shown in real time by how much longer it was taking to install VM additions with each build. So I decided to put a set of programs in the startup folder to see just how long it would take for each of these to seem usable after boot up, and also kind of to see how it would cope with multitasking. Is it a fair test? Probably not, but there isn't really a super scientific way to measure the boot up time, since even while it's idling, the CPU usage is always super high. There isn't even a stopwatch or anything on this install, so I just kind of powered the VM on and judged it by the system clock in the top right corner. So, unsurprisingly, builds 3683 and 4008 both were the best performing overall. For the most part, I've grouped these two together since they perform incredibly similar to me, though 3683 does lag behind a little bit in boot up time since it likes to hang for a few minutes before it's actually usable. This is normal even on real hardware. To be clear, they're still much slower than a decent PC from the era. Both took about 4 to 5 minutes just to fully boot up and have everything load enough to seem usable, with some glitches of course. But if I had to use one of these builds in this scenario, I could probably make either of these two work, just with a lot of patience needed. It was really build 4029 where things started getting bad. Maybe if I had a lot more time, I would have installed more and more builds to see exactly where it got bad, but clearly somewhere between build 4008 and 4029, things just got bloated enough that it was becoming more than a bit too much for this software. 4029 took more than double the amount of time to boot up, more than 10 minutes. 4039 was much of the same here, about 10 minutes to boot up, including over 5 minutes just to get to the desktop, thanks to this build being another one with a massive period where it just kind of hangs for a super long time. 4074 actually started much stronger. It took just a few minutes to boot to the desktop with some of the programs opening. But then it kind of just hung again for more than 10 minutes, putting the total time at almost 20 minutes. This one was already at a disadvantage anyway, thanks to the lack of any functional graphics drivers, meaning the resolution and color mode were incredibly low. And of course, the best has been saved for last, build 4093. Unsurprisingly, the most useless build I've installed today. I can barely even get this one to boot up properly. A lot of times, it only partially loads Explorer without the taskbar and sidebar. VM Editions was a massive pain in the rear to install, and perhaps worst of all, it didn't really improve the hardware support, like at all. Everything is just so slow on this build, I think it's basically unusable. Adding programs to the startup folder in order to recreate this test was a chore. This build on its own takes probably 10 minutes just to boot up to the desktop, and that's assuming it's properly loaded Explorer. If you can believe it, I spent more than a full hour attempting to add programs to the startup folder, but it just wasn't happening. I was able to add one, but Explorer was just that slow, and I really needed to get this video done. But I can just tell you, based on this alone, it would have been the slowest of them all. And that's not really surprising. None of this is really surprising. This entire video has gone exactly how I thought it would. The earliest builds would be kind of okay, but the more they fucked with it, the more unusable and terrible it would be, all the way up until the very last build, which is basically impossible to use. So there you have it, I guess. There are still a couple more questions to touch on, the first being what happens when you try to run a post-development reset build here, and the answer is absolutely nothing. Even some of the earliest post-reset builds like 5048 will not run, at least out of the box due to ACPI issues. And this issue persists all the way up to the RTM build of Windows Vista. I vaguely remember there being ways to get around this, but I just can't be bothered here because I can't imagine it would work any better than any of the pre-reset builds I've tried here today. The other question is, how's the G5 handling all this? And the answer to that is pretty well, actually. This thing is hardly breaking a sweat. It's only using the equivalent of one of those processors, and RAM is nowhere close to being a problem. I think part of that is because, as I alluded to earlier, this program really isn't very good in my experience. This program barely even supports Windows XP very well, and it was designed to run on much older and much worse hardware than a G5, and thus emulates super old hardware. Hardware that Longhorn was never ever going to be able to know what to do with. I believe the emulated CPU here is a Pentium 2. And of course, by the time Longhorn's remains morphed into Windows Vista, Apple moved on from PowerPC to Intel, and that was the end of Virtual PC for Mac. This program never got very many updates, nor did it ever receive a newer version. Of course, I don't want to be entirely negative. It's still really cool that you can do this at all. It may definitely be a silly experiment, but it's definitely one that's possible, if you're incredibly bored like me. For the most part, any build of Longhorn will probably install and run. Of course, at its best, it won't be super practical, and at its worst, well, you get the idea.